Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy Roll Good. Today we're finishing off the new revised Unearth Arcana for the Psion. That includes the Psion base class and all those features related to the base class. That's what we covered in our previous video. In this video, we're going to cover all the subclasses that are in this Unearth Arcana. And then as we noted in the previous video, the one subclass we saw before, the Psy Warper, it's not in this Unearthed Arcana. Whether that means that they thought it was good and they didn't need a second revision, or they just thought they should toss it and maybe release it later on, we don't really know. But today we're just covering the Metamorph, the Psykinetic, and the Telepath. So if you want to see my changes for the base class, go ahead and watch my last video. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and get started with this one, starting with the Metamorph, and as always, again, starting with the summary. Again, looking at the summary, there's very few changes here, mainly just word exclusions. Nothing is really functionally changing or like changing the narrative direction of the subclass. It seems like they're just kind of getting rid of redundant or extraneous wording. They also fixed the spacing issue on You Mold It, which I pointed out in the last video. So let's go ahead and move on to the actual features. Looking at the Metamorph spells at level 3, no changes to speak of here. But then moving on to the other level 3 feature, their sort of key feature for the subclass, we have Extended Limbs, which is now known as Mutable Form in this revision. You can see that it's mostly the same other than the name change. You still take the bonus action. You can expend a psionic energy die to psionically stretch your limbs for 1 minute. But then there's this big blurb of yellow text that says you roll the expended psionic energy die and gain a number of temporary hit points equal to the number rolled plus your intelligence modifier minimum of 1. So in addition to the benefits of extending your reach, your speed, and the range of your touch spells, you now get additional temporary hit points equal to the roll of that psionic energy die. And I do feel like this extra temporary hit points, especially since we're also adding our intelligence modifier, so we always get like a decent value out of it. We don't necessarily have to worry about, oh, we just rolled a once, we have 1 temporary hit point. I always like that kind of buffer to make sure that the floor of our rolls is a little bit higher. But I remember one of my sort of critiques of this subclass is that it sort of wants to play in melee range, or at least in close range. However, again, it is still a d6 hit die class. It doesn't have much in the way of armor. So in that sense, it felt like a very squishy class for me. So a subclass that wants to play in melee range is going to be taking more damage, obviously. So having these extra temporary hit points will at least help shore up their defenses a little bit. And one of my original critiques of this feature was that the bonus action timing would conflict with the psionic modes of the base class, but as we saw in the base class, the psionic mode feature was removed entirely. Well, mostly removed entirely, some of them moved into the disciplines. But that has basically been answered probably more indirectly than directly. Moving on to their other level 3 feature, this is kind of building off of the whole idea of having these extended psionic limbs. We have organic weapons. When it comes to the base rules of the organic weapons, we can see that there are a few changes. A couple things have been completely removed from the Unearthed Arcana. The first of which is the ability to form these weapons whenever you make an opportunity attack. You can see on the left, previously is whenever you take the attack action or make an opportunity attack, but now it is only when you take the attack action. In addition, at the bottom it said that you could cause this weapon to deal psychic damage as opposed to the normal damage type of the weapon. That has also been removed. Technically, you can still get psychic damage on your attacks, I believe, through the attack mode psionic discipline. I can't remember the exact name of that discipline. It was a newly added one in the previous video. So you can still get psychic damage that way. I thought when I first saw that this was removed that we might see this baked into a later feature because they didn't want class to be able to switch its damage that early. That usually comes online for other classes around the time that they get extra attack. But spoiler alert, this doesn't appear again in the rest of this subclass. But what was added to this feature was instead of only being able to form this weapon whenever we take the attack action, we can now also just do it as a magic action to form our free hand into either the Bone Blade, Flesh Maul, or Viscera launcher. And sort of in the middle on the left there in the red, you can see that originally it said that your limb automatically returns to its normal form after you make an attack. That is now no longer the case. Rather, now it says that your limb retains the form of the organic weapon until you take a magic action to change it into another organic weapon until you're unconscious or until you return the limb to its previous form, no action required. So technically, you can still automatically change your hand back to a normal hand immediately after an attack because you can change it back to the previous form, no action required. I do think that there's a bit of a lack of clarity in this last highlighted section where it says until you take the magic action to change it into another organic weapon, and then the final part where it says or you return the limb to its previous form, no action required. So for example, if I took a magic action to change my hand into a bone blade and then took another magic action to change it into the flesh maul, the previous form of my hand would technically then be the bone blade. So if I looked at that final sentence in the first paragraph where it says or you return the limb to its previous form, no action required. I think technically what that would be telling me in this situation is that I could switch back and forth between the bone blade and the flesh maul, no action required, because that was the previous form of that limb. I don't think that's what they intended with that, because that means that you basically can't get your hand back without going unconscious. I think they just kind of need to clarify that lesson, that the previous form is specifically your original hand. That, I believe that's what they intended with that, and not the ability to switch back and forth between these weapons with no action required. But that whole previous form text just makes it very ambiguous. So that is the change to the organic weapons feature. We can take a look at the actual weapons. There's no changes to the bone blade, the flesh maul, nor the viscera launcher. So then as we move on to their other features, at level 6 they get their extra attack. There's no changes here, but then as we move on to their other level 6 feature, we had Quickened Healing. This one has been removed from this Unearth Arcana. This one allowed you to cast Cure Wounds as a bonus action by expending 2 Psionic Energy Die and then adding one roll of those Psionic Energy Dice to the number healed. That has been removed for the most part. Instead, now we have a feature called Flesh Weaver. This one is now attached to the mutable form. It says when you use mutable form, you can expend an additional Psionic Energy Die to gain the following benefits while the feature is active. So currently at this level, mutable form lasts for 1 minute. It is a bonus action, and it alone also expends a Psionic Energy Die just to activate the base feature. If you want to activate these additional benefits, you need to expend the additional Psionic Energy Die to do so. When you do that, you get the benefits of Organic Defense, where you get just a flat +2 bonus to your armor class. And then secondly, you get Empowered Healing. It says when you cast a spell with a spell slot that restores hit points to 1 or more creatures, you can expend 1 Psionic Energy Die and add the number rolled to the hit points regained. So again, you have to expend 2 Psionic Energy Die total to even get this feature running, but the extra +2 bonus to AC is actually pretty good. Again, one of my critiques is that the subclass felt like it was going to get knocked around a lot because it's trying to play in melee range, and it just has the hit die of a wizard, no real other armor benefits. So just a free +2 bonus to AC is really good, and technically if you like dipped into Artificer or Cleric to get like medium armor and shield proficiency, that would stack with all of that. Like nothing here so far at least requires you to not be wearing armor or not be wearing a shield, so you could get a pretty inflated AC if you stacked that with this feature. As for Empowered Healing, the Psion doesn't really have that many healing spells, although you do get a bunch in the Metamorph subclass spell list, such as the Cure Wounds. Aura Vitality is a very good one, as well as Mass Cure Wounds. Although I guess technically the way that this is written, it wouldn't really work well with Aura of Vitality. It says when you cast a spell with a spell slot that restores hit points to 1 or more creatures, so it's triggered when you cast the spell, not when you restore the hit points. So maybe they would want to flip that around if they want to, because you still have to expend the Psionic Energy Die every time you do it anyway. So maybe if it was like when you restore hit points using a spell that was cast using a spell slot to 1 or more creatures or something like that. The way it's written now, you cannot use it more than once during a spell. So the additional turns that Aura of Vitality is active, you can't do it more than once. They would need to flip that around so that the trigger is when you restore hit points. Overall, I think this feature is actually very interesting, a different direction for this class, where originally it just felt like a variation of the Blade Singer, and in many ways it still is. However, it now feels a lot more like they're trying to make it more of a battle priest, sort of like your sort of melee range cleric type of class, rather than being this sort of purely offensive sort of blade song type subclass. But that is the level 6 features for this subclass. Let's go and move on to level 10 for the Metamorph, where we now have what is called Improved Mutable Form, because of course Mutable Form is now one of the level 3 features, replacing extended limbs. Some very small changes to this one, where of course now they were just referred to mutable form instead of extended limbs, where it's improving that feature. This still increases the duration of it to 10 minutes, but also you can see that there's a small nerf down at the bottom in Unnatural Flexibility, where it used to give us a +2 bonus to our AC. It now only gives us a +1. Again, that's likely just a balancing factor because of the Flesh Weaver feature that we just looked at, where you get a +2 bonus to AC when you activate mutable form and expend the extra Psionic Energy Die. Whereas the +1 here is just a completely passive AC. Whenever you activate mutable form, you still have the ability to expend these extra Psionic Energy Die for Flesh Weaver and get a total of +3 to your AC, 1 from improved mutable form and then 2 from Flesh Weaver. That is if you choose the Unnatural Flexibility. Maybe you want the +2 to AC and then choose resistance to one of these types of damage. It is very notable here that the Stony Epidermis includes bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. It is actually not super common to be able to get those kinds of resistances, where I would imagine that giving yourself a +2 bonus to AC and then resistance to the damage type that you expect to be taking probably will work out better in the long run. You do have that ability to get an extra +1 AC, as well as being able to like slip through small spaces with Unnatural Flexibility. So that then brings us to the capstone for the Metamorph. This one is called Life Bending Weapons. We can see that there's pretty much a whole paragraph that's been added to this one. Originally, this basically just said whenever you hit a creature with one of your organic weapons, you could roll a psionic energy die and expend it. You would deal extra necrotic damage to one creature in a 10-foot emanation from you, and then have a number of creatures within range also regain a number of hit points equal to that amount. Instead, this has now been changed to basically passively deal extra necrotic damage. It's, on the right, it says when you hit a target with an attack roll using your organic weapon, roll one psionic energy die. The target takes extra necrotic damage equal to the number rolled. The roll doesn't expend the die. So at this level, every time you hit with one of your organic weapons, they take extra necrotic damage equal to one roll of your psionic energy die, just passively. And then the feature that existed previously is now sort of an activated feature. So it says alternatively, so you have to choose not to deal just the extra necrotic damage. Alternatively, you can expend one psionic energy die. That target still takes that damage, the necrotic damage. However, then each creature of your choice within a 30-foot emanation, this is up from 10, regains hit points equal to the number rolled plus your intelligence modifier. And then you can only use this activated feature once per turn. So you can do the passive damage as many times per turn as you can attack. The active can only be activated once per turn and only on your turn, because it is, again, until the start of your next turn. These are both pretty great quality of life features. This does feel a lot more powerful as a capstone. Again, it also does sort of reinforce that sort of battle priest playstyle. That, of course, then brings us to the final question for this subclass is the revised Metamorph any good? And I would say, much like the base class, this is basically just buffed across the board. Not really huge buffs. None of the buffs are particularly insane. Mostly just a lot of quality of life features and really kind of helping define the subclass a little better. The extra temporary hit points from mutable form, as well as the extra bonus AC from Fleshweaver, I do think help shore up a lot of the early defenses for the subclass, which was, again, one of my major critiques of the Metamorph in the first Unearth Arcana. My concerns between the conflicting bonus actions of mutable form and psionic modes has been sort of indirectly answered by the removal of psionic modes in the base class. And again, I do really like the fact that they are pushing this more towards a battle priest style of play, where you're kind of motivated to buff your allies or heal your allies in that way, rather than being more aggressive like the Bladesinger or even the Hexblade would be. So the Metamorph, again, looks pretty good. Again, nothing super crazy. I thought most of these subclasses were decent in the original one, and again, they've just improved them in this Unearth Arcana. So let's go ahead and move on to the Psykinetic, as always, starting with the summary. There's been no changes to the summary. It says everything that it did before. So then looking at the Psykinetic spell list, we can again see that everything here is the same. But then moving on to the telekinetic techniques, also at level 3, this is where we begin to see some changes. Let's start on the right side with the actual revision. It says when you use telekinetic propel, which again is one of your base class features, we saw that you can now have a free version of it where you can just do a push or pull of 5 feet without expending a psionic energy die, or you can use your psionic energy die to expand the range that you push or pull that creature. It says when you use telekinetic propel, you can roll 1d4 and use the number rolled instead of expending the psionic energy die. So now if you're the Psykinetic, not only do you have the free push-pull as part of telekinetic propel in the base class, again, very similar to the push-pull of the telekinetic feat, but now you can extend that range for free without expending a psionic energy die just by rolling a 1d4 instead of whatever your current die size is. And again, that 1d4 it's going to be a number of feet equal to the number rolled times 5, because it's 5 feet per the die. So basically this makes your telekinetic propel a minimum of a 10-foot push-pull up from 5, and could be as high as a 25-foot push or pull if you roll a 4 on that d4. It goes on to say, in addition, when a target fails the saving throw against your telekinetic propel, you can impose one of the following effects on that target. So this is sort of the kind of nerf to this feature, whereas previously that requirement of failing the saving throw only mattered for the telekinetic bolt at the bottom of this feature, where that creature takes damage when they fail the saving throw. Now the creature needs to fail the saving throw for any of these effects to take place. So you have boost, which increases the target's speed by 10 feet. This is something that you would of course be using on your allies. And remember that in the 2024 rules, we can choose to fail any saving throw. If a Psion ally is trying to pull us away from an enemy to make sure that we can get away without having to take the disengage action, we can choose to fail that and then also have our speed increased by the boost feature. This doesn't really represent a change for the telekinetic bolt because they always had to fail anyway. I think that this is kind of a nerf for disorient, because if you're pulling a creature away or pushing a creature away, chances are they're not in a position where they would be able to make an opportunity attack, whereas previously they weren't required to fail the saving throw. So if they succeeded the saving throw, they would still not be able to make opportunity attacks, and whoever was near them could get away scot-free. This doesn't mean that there won't be opportunities where this is still useful. pull, like if you're pulling the creature closer to you and you wanted to be able to get away somehow. I don't know exactly how that would work. Or if you're just fighting in a very small space and your allies still need to move past that creature for some reason to get to another target, then they still don't provoke opportunity attacks. I mean, there's still situations where this will come up, but I think in the most common situation where you're just trying to push or pull a creature away from an ally so that your ally can get away, you're better off just targeting the ally with the effect and then pulling them away instead. Where they are in the turn order might make your choice a little bit different, but I think in the most situations, Disorient probably won't come into play that much. You're probably going to either be using Boost or the Telekinetic Bolt. That would be my guess anyway. I really like the free 1d4 to extend the range of the push. And again, Telekinetic was one of my favorite feats ever introduced to the game. Being able to extend that range kind of for free baked into this base class, also really great. The fact that every target now has to fail the saving throw to be affected by this, it probably makes sense as a balancing feature. You shouldn't be able to just say that a creature can't make opportunity attacks without having to fail a saving throw, but it is just a little unfortunate, at least when it comes to the Disorient feature. So that brings us to the other level 3 feature where we have Stronger Telekinesis. This is a new feature for the Psykinetic. It says when you cast Mage Hand, its range increases by 30 feet when you cast it, and the hand can carry up to 20 pounds. I think one thing that would need small correction here is the same change that they made to the telekinetic feat within the 2024 rules. Is technically when it says the range increases by 30 feet when you cast it, that just refers to the base range of the spell. It does not include any ranges included in that spell, which is why in the telekinetic feat, which has very similar wording or had very similar wording, it was instead updated in 2024 to say its range and the distance it can be away from you both increase by 30 feet. I think they would just need to add that to this text. Very easy fix. If they don't fix it, then you can technically cast it further away than it can exist. So you cast it at 60 feet or whatever, and then it can only be 30 feet away from you, so it disappears immediately. However, assuming that they fix that, you could still then technically take the telekinetic feat and get a 90-foot range Mage Hand that is both subtle and invisible, which might possibly lead to a bunch of shenanigans. That's pretty far away. You don't really benefit from anything else with the telekinetic feat, but if you just want to meme and have that 90-foot range on your Mage Hand, that is something that you could do. Let's go ahead and move on to then level 6 for the Psykinetic, where we had Empowered Attack Mode. Of course, the Psionic modes, as we said before, have been removed from the base class, so this is no longer within the Unearth Arcana for the most part. However, this was sort of reworked into another level 6 feature called Destructive Trance. This one says at the start of your turn, you can expend 1 psionic energy die to enter a destructive state. For the next 10 minutes, you gain a fly speed of 20 feet and can hover. And when you cast a Psion spell that expends a spell slot, you can roll your psionic energy die and add the number rolled to 1 damage roll of the spell. This roll doesn't expend the psionic energy die. So this is technically doing a lot of the same things that the Empowered Attack Mode was doing. However, it is a lot different in many ways as well. We can start with what is sort of buffed from the previous version, first of which is the timing. So this one now says at the start of your turn, whereas previously the Empowered Attack Mode was attached to your Psionic modes, which were a bonus action. So this is effectively action free. You just need to make that decision at the start of your turn. And the other buff to this compared to the Empowered Attack Mode is that this lasts for 10 minutes, whereas the Psionic mode only lasted for 1 minute. So this is now faster, being able to use it at the start of your turn with no action required. And also the duration is 10 times longer. The sort of neutral changes to this feature is that you expend 1 Psionic energy die. While the Empowered Attack Mode didn't say that you had to expend a Psionic energy die, that is required to enter attack mode in the original Unearth Arcana. So you're expending 1 either way, so there's no real change there. As well as being able to add damage to your Psion spells that you casted during this. That was originally also part of the feature of Empowered Attack Mode. However, in Empowered Attack Mode, it was equal to your Intelligence modifier. Now it's equal to 1 roll of your Psionic energy die, and you don't expend that die. Technically, this probably represents a little bit of a nerf on average, at least until you get into the higher levels where you have bigger Psionic energy die. But again, you are rolling dice, so you do have the chance for higher highs on that. However, the one more significant nerf to this compared to Empowered Attack Mode is that the fly speed was reduced to 20 feet from 60 feet previously. I'm not sure how I feel about that significant of a nerf. I mean, fly speed is fly speed once you have it, and assuming none of your enemies have fly speed. Once you're out of range, you're out of range anyway. You still have hover, so that's good. So this is probably just kind of a balancing factor since it is A, faster, and B, lasts longer. Again, probably okay. Maybe it's a little heavy-handed. But one thing to note here, again, beyond just what this feature offers you, if you can fly as a Psykinetic Psion, again, remember you do have that free push-pull of the Psion, and you can extend that push and pull. So if you are above a creature, because you can pull them directly towards you, you can pull them into the air and cause them to drop, which then will deal falling damage. And then if they take falling damage, then they are knocked prone. So beyond just being able to add extra damage to all of your Psion spells during this 10 minutes, you can also basically knock creatures prone or attempt to as a bonus action. So a lot of potential power there. But again, the 20 feet fly speed is a bit of a nerf, but I think the overall power of this feature is still still very much worth it. Let's move on then to the other level 6 feature. This one is called Rebounding Field. There's been small changes to this one. This one says whenever you cast Shield and cause an attack to miss, you can expend a Psionic Energy die and then deal some damage back and gain some temporary hit points. The difference here is that originally you rolled 2 Psionic Energy die and dealt that much damage and gained that many temporary hit points. Now you're only rolling 1 Psionic Energy die, but you're also adding your intelligence modifier. So again, the floor of your rolls are a little bit higher, because previously you could roll 2 1s and you only have 2 damage and 2 temporary hit points. Now if you roll a 1, it's 1 plus your intelligence modifier, which is slightly better. And now you also gain the temporary hit points whether or not that creature fails the saving throw. They succeed on the saving throw, they take half damage and you gain half the number of temporary hit points. I mean, based on the damage that was dealt. But basically you always get some amount of temporary hit points regardless of pass or fail. So overall, just positive changes for this feature. Let's then move on to level 10, where we have Enhanced Telekinetic Crush. This one empowers the Telekinetic Crush spell. This is a Psion spell. It's basically a giant cube that does a bunch of damage and attempts to knock creatures prone. Enhanced Telekinetic Crush says that when you cast this spell, you can expend 1 Psionic Energy die to modify the spell, that whether or not the creature succeeds on the saving throw, their speed is halved until the start of your next turn. The change now is that you can, in addition, roll the expended Psionic Energy die and add that much damage to 1 damage roll of that spell, which is going to be the whole roll of Telekinetic Crush. So that extra damage can mean quite a bit. That's basically, you can think of that sort of like upcasting the spell. It deals like 5d6. At this level, I think you probably have a d8, moving up to a d10 and eventually a d12. So you can potentially add a lot of damage to this third level spell, I think it is. So if nothing else, you're expending 1 Psionic Energy die to effectively upcast the spell by 1 level. However, I will say this still really isn't my favorite feature of this subclass, because again, I'm just trying to imagine the only time that I would feel motivated to use this, at least for the speed reduction, is if I'm trying to slow down enemies. Maybe in like the opening round of combat and enemies are relatively far away and they haven't been able to take their turn yet, and I can possibly just slow them all down so that it makes it harder for them to get into the spaces that they want to get to. Sort of basically after the first round of combat, when everyone is kind of where they kind of want or need to be, there's a good chance that having a creature speed doesn't really mean much, because either they weren't going to move anyway, or if they succeeded the saving throw and can still move half their speed, they could probably still get to some target that they want to get to. So even though this feature's been buffed, it's still, again, my least favorite feature of the subclass. But let's go and move on to the capstone. This one is called Heightened Telekinesis. This one originally allowed you to expend 4 Psionic Energy die when you cast Telekinesis to modify the spell so that it doesn't require concentration, and that it would also allow you to target gargantuan creatures and objects. When you do that, the spell's duration becomes 1 minute instead, very similar to a lot of the other sort of modification of concentration spells. The revision, however, now says that you can cast Telekinesis without expending a spell slot by expending the 4 Psionic Energy die, and the ability to modify the spell is basically just limited to the use of this feature. The big buff here is that spending that 4 Psionic Energy die basically buys you a 5th level spell slot, which is a pretty powerful effect. You know, at level 14, you have 10 Psionic Energy dice at this level, so you can possibly get up to 10 back when you use your Psionic Recovery, whatever that's called, where you get all of your expended Psionic Energy die back after meditating for 1 minute. So you can have up to 20 during the day. Can't have all 20 at once, so with this costing 4 Psionic Energy die, that basically means you can do it 4 times with 4 Psionic Energy die left over for other purposes. You can think of this like up to 4 additional 5th level spells throughout an adventuring day. You know, you have to be using them on Telekinesis, but you are still not using those other 5th level spell slots that you have, but you're still using this 5th level spell. For the original feature, I felt pretty neutral about this, but now the efficiency of being able to essentially trade 4 Psionic Energy die for a 5th level spell slot, I think that counts for a lot, and I think that's a relatively good rate. Not only that, but if you were to get to 18th level, where you get the feature where when you roll initiative, you regain expended Psionic Energy die up until 4, so until you have 4 Psionic Energy die, basically guaranteeing that you can always, at that level, choose to use this feature once per combat if you want to, or you can use your Psionic Energy die on something else, but if you want to use this feature after 18th level, you're always guaranteed to be able to do it. I will say sort of my one critique about the being able to target gargantuan creatures and objects still kind of exists, and they can't really fix that, I think. And that's just that, of course, gargantuan creatures traditionally have very, very good strength saving throws, and Telekinesis is a strength saving throw, so pretty unlikely that you'd ever be able to successfully telekinetically grab a gargantuan creature. Not to say that it's impossible, but it's relatively unlikely, probably not worth using your whole action to try to do it. But that doesn't mean that you can't grab a gargantuan object, pick it up, and drop it on a bunch of enemies. So there's still certainly situations where you'd want to use this. So that then brings us to the last question for the Psykinetic, and that is the Psykinetic any good? And I would say, true to form in this revision, the subclass has been largely streamlined. There haven't really been huge buffs. I do really like the 1d4 Psionic Energy die on telekinetic techniques for free. And because, again, maybe this is just me loving the telekinetic feat, the push-pull of it so much, being able to push or pull a creature 10 to 25 feet for free as a bonus action on every turn, this might make this subclass one of the most efficient in terms of how many psionic energy die that they use, which again will feed into the capstone if you get there. So you can save those psionic energy die after level 14 to make sure that you're using your heightened telekinesis, more often. The changes between empowered attack mode and destructive trance, again, that's mostly a wash. The big nerf there was the fly speed, but again, overall, it's a very powerful effect. Still, you can, again, combined with the push-pull of the Psykinetic, you can pull creatures up in the air and knock them down. That's a very powerful interaction beyond just being able to add extra damage for free to all of your Psion spells during that destructive trance. I still don't like enhanced telekinetic crush. I wouldn't be sad to see this one go and just replaced with something else entirely. Destructive trance basically does the same thing as far as adding damage to all of our Psion spells during the duration. Technically, enhanced telekinetic crush stacks with destructive trance, such as if I'm already in the trance and then I cast telekinetic crush, I can add 2 psionic energy die to that damage roll. But that's if I feel like being that aggressive with my psionic energy die, which maybe if you're a blaster, maybe you feel that way. Maybe this is just me not being a big, blaster caster type of player. I would probably want to be more efficient and just use destructive trance, cast telekinetic crush, and get the extra damage for free without having to spend even more psionic energy die. And then I can add extra damage to all of my spells. But overall, I just think enhanced telekinetic crush, my least favorite feature of this subclass. As for heightened telekinesis, again, freeing up those 5th level spell slots I think counts for a lot. Even if the feature itself is fine, telekinesis isn't the most powerful spell, although it can be very powerful in the right situation. Bringing up those 5th level spell slots does count for a lot, and again, this combos really well with the Psionic Reserves feature at level 18, where you always get 4 psionic energy die, at least if you're less than 4 at the start of every combat. Like it says at the bottom here, despite my critiques of this subclass, mainly around the enhanced telekinetic crush, this is probably the one I'd want to play the most, again, just because I love playing chess and moving creatures around within combat in D&D. It's been one of my favorite things to do over the last few years. That then brings us to the last subclass, that is the Telepath. So looking at the summary, again, no changes in the summary. But let's go ahead and move on to the Telepath spell list, where we do see some changes. Originally at level 5, you got Speak with Plants, and at level 9, you got Awaken. Both of these are basically either talking to plants or causing plants to become sentient. They replaced Speak with Plants at level 5 with the spell Slow, and then replaced Awaken with Yolanda's Regal Presence at level 9. I know in the original video, I kind of thought that it was funny that you could also speak to plants because you're such a strong telepath, I guess. I don't think I really held it against the class. I just thought it was kind of funny or weird. But apparently they maybe got enough critiques or maybe complaints about it that they felt the need to, change these spells altogether. But Slow and Yolanda's Regal Presence are both great spells, so I'm not really going to complain about those. Moving on to our other level 3 feature, we have Mind Infiltrator. This one says when you cast Detect Thoughts, you can expend 1 psionic energy die to modify the spell. Originally this was 2, so now you're just that much more efficient with it. When you do it this way, the spell doesn't require concentration. In addition, when you use the Read Thoughts effect of the spell, the target doesn't know whether you're probing its mind if it fails the Wisdom saving throw. So the main change here is just the cost of it being reduced from 2 to 1. The phrase where it says when you use the Read Thoughts effect of the spell, I think was always the case. I believe this is just clarifying text, because that is the only text that says the target could know that you're probing into its mind. I think this was very clearly always the case, but they just put in that clarifying text. Moving on to the other level 3 feature, we had something called Telepathic Hub. This has been basically completely removed. This originally expanded the range of your telepathy and then allowed you to communicate simultaneously with a number of creatures equal to 1 roll of your psionic energy die or something like that. This has been removed completely. This has now been replaced with something called Telepathic Distraction. It says when a creature you can see within range of your telepathy hits with an attack roll, you can take a reaction to roll 1 psionic energy die and subtract it from the number rolled from the attack roll, potentially causing the attack to miss. The die is expended only if the target misses the attack. So one thing I remember liking about this subclass is that the way that it builds off of the telepathic connection on the base class. Telepathic connection in the base class in the original Unearth Arcana was very weak. You needed to do a lot to make it very useful. Now that the base radius of it in the base class is 30 feet, you have a pretty wide radius to be able to use this on your allies, and you also have the ability once per long rest to expand the range for free. So even in larger battlefields where you need to expand that distance, you get it once for free, and the distance is increased by 10 times the number rolled on the die, so it's a minimum of 40 feet, and then it just gets much bigger beyond that. This is basically very similar to the Bard's Cutting Words, although this only works on attack rolls. I do like the flavor here. I do like that it works within the radius of your telepathic connection, and you have the ability to sort of expand it at will if you need to. And the fact that it's only expended if you miss the target, again, just baking in more of that efficiency. Psionic energy die never goes to waste. Additionally, all the features at level 3 for the Telepath also were very passive, so I'm very happy to see a feature like this that is very sort of active and really sort of changing the way that the Telepath plays, particularly in combat. But this is a feature that actually sort of does something, whereas previously they were all very just kind of passive effects. That then brings us to level 6, where we had a feature called Empowered Defense Mode. Much like the Empowered Attack Mode, Psionic modes have been removed from the base class, so this one is also removed from this subclass. Instead, we now have a feature called Bulwark Mind. It says at the start of your turn, you can expend 1 psionic energy die to strengthen your mind and enter a fortified state. For the next 10 minutes, you have resistance to psychic damage, and whenever you make an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throw, you can add 1 roll of your psionic energy die to the save. Rolling the psionic energy die doesn't expend it. You can't use this benefit if you have the incapacitated condition. So this is very similar to the empowered defense mode. Defense mode gave you resistance to psychic damage originally, so you still have that baked in here as well, but it's baked into a subclass feature. And whereas the previous feature only allowed you to roll 1d4 and add it to your saving throws, this one is your psionic energy die, which of course then scales with your level, and you're adding it specifically to your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throws. Was it that way on the original? So yeah, this one only affects your mental saving throws, but you do get to add your whole psionic energy die to it. So it's a much bigger die, much smaller pool of saving throws. Psychic resistance might not come up all the time. Still, being able to protect your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws is very important. So I can see definitely activating this on a semi-regular basis, so I'm not too mad about this. I will say that I do miss the fact that with the empowered defense mode originally, it said that you could extend the benefits of it to creatures affected by your telepathic connection, basically covering your allies with it. I do miss that on this feature. Maybe being able to add your full psionic energy die to all their charisma, intelligence, and wisdom saving throws is a little bit too powerful, but that's one of these sort of interactions with the subclass that I liked, where it was based on your telepathic range. And it was sort of like a mini paladin in a lot of ways, where the paladin aura covers all of the saving throws and adds a flat bonus, whereas this one covers only the mental saving throws and is a variable bonus based on the die roll. So maybe that's something that I'd like to see put back in here, even if allies can maybe only add like half the roll to their save. That is Bulwark Mind. Let's go ahead and move on to the other level 6 feature called Potent Thoughts. This is basically the same as it was in the original Unearth Arcana, but they have one big change here where it says you have telepathy with a range of 60 feet. So the base range for the base class is 30 feet, but this is now a 60-foot radius from you. At this point, you'll probably never need to extend the range of your telepathic connection to at least cover your allies in combat, unless it's like in a very, very extreme case. You know, I'm looking at you, Yesterhill, in Curse of Shroud. But other than that, you're probably going to have a pretty easy time keeping your allies within range. That then brings us to the level 10 feature. This one is called Telepathic Bolstering. The one change here is that they now removed the benefit that you have a telepathy out to 30 feet. That range was of course baked into the base class. We just saw at level 6 we get the range increased to 60 feet. This feature is otherwise the same, so we can move on from this one to the capstone. This one is Scramble Minds. This one has had pretty significant buffs. It is very similar to the enhanced telekinesis or heightened telekinesis of the Psykinetic, where it says you can cast Confusion without expending a spell slot by expending 4 psionic energy die instead. When you cast Confusion without a spell slot using this feature, again much like the language of heightened telekinesis, you modify the spell so that the radius of the sphere becomes 30 feet, and you can choose one creature you can see within the spell's area to automatically succeed on their saving throw against the spell. So it's a much larger radius, so you're much more likely to catch an ally in that radius. You can cause them to succeed and not be affected by the spell. In addition, it says when a creature under the effect of the spell starts its turn, you choose their behavior from the table for their turn instead of the creature rolling to determine its behavior. So not only does this have the sort of same built-in efficiency as heightened telekinesis for the Psykinetic, Confusion is only a 4th level spell. You're not getting quite the same level of buyback as the heightened telekinesis, which is a 5th level spell, but still saving your 4th level spell slots is very good. Confusion is a pretty good spell, and actually with this feature it is a great spell. Confusion does not require like the charmed condition or frightened condition, anything like that, so creatures that would normally be immune to that would still be affected by Confusion. But the big thing here is that you get to choose what behavior they take on their turn. Originally the creature had to roll 2d10s. That still left the possibility that they could take their action as normal. They would still have their bonus actions and reactions restricted, but they could take their movement and action as normal on their turn if they rolled a 9 and a 10, or a 9 and a 9 and a 10 and a 10. But now you get to choose. Again, let's look at the table for Confusion. So again, normally it's a 10-foot radius sphere, it's 30 feet with this feature. Affected creatures still can't take bonus actions or reactions, so that's always the case. But now you can basically choose whether they take the first option, the second option, or the third option, and then for enemies, you would just probably ignore the 4th option in most cases. If you have more than one ally in the area and you can only cause one of them to succeed and the other one fails, you can choose the final one where they can choose their own behavior. They can still take their movement in action, but the ability to choose what the creature does, this might be too much. This is almost like mass dominate monster. You don't get fine control over them, but you basically get to force them to just waste their turn no matter what. You can either cause them to move in a direction, choose that they stand still and do nothing, or you can choose that they make a random attack against another creature within their melee range. And if there are none of your allies within melee range, then you are forcing them to attack an enemy. So that is extraordinarily powerful, and honestly might be too good. It's like they swung the pendulum in sort of the complete opposite direction. There's probably a middle ground in there somewhere where they can drop this back just a little bit, because this is so close to just a mass dominate spell. That then brings us to the final question for the Telepath is the Telepath any good? And I would say arguably this is maybe the most well put together of the 3 subclasses. Again, I think that the Telepathic Distraction at level 3 fixes a lot of the early game lull, the sort of inactive passive features that were at level 3 before. We at least have one sort of active combat feature, which is really nice. The greater expansion of the telepathic range is really welcome. Again, I do miss the ability to cover allies with the Bulwark Mind / Empowered Defense mode. Again, adding the whole Psychic Energy die to their mental saves maybe is a bit much, but even maybe like half that rounded up would be nice. But when it comes to Scrambled Minds, I think that's probably the one thing that maybe needs a little bit of tuning. Whereas previously you always still had the chance that the creature could take their turn as normal, besides being able to not take their bonus action or reaction. You now get the complete opposite end of that, where you basically get to choose what they do on their turn based on the behaviors within that table. I think you could buff this to be able to ignore all allies within the area of effect, and then instead be able to choose exactly what the creature does on their turn. The affected creatures instead roll a D8 to determine their behavior rather than a D10, which basically means that their behavior is still random, but they can never take their movement and action as normal. I think that's the fair middle ground, but again, that's just my opinion. You might feel something completely different. So let me know down in the comments how you feel about either the Telepath, the Metamorph, or the Psykinetic. What do you think is good about these changes? What do you think is bad? I think the survey's open until next week, I think on the 23rd, if I recall correctly. There are very few things that I think would require changing here. Most of the things here look pretty good, but definitely get down in those comments and let me know what you think. I'm definitely interested to hear you guys' opinions, especially if you've had the time to playtest both the original and the current version. Just overall, how do they compare, especially with the base class changes to the overall efficiency of the psionic energy die as well. So while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you liked what you saw here and you want to see more from me, please consider hitting that subscribe button and support the channel. I release videos every Wednesday, so you always have something to look forward to. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.